Good morning, everyone. Is everyone excited to be here? Yes. I am just not feeling the love. I have high schools present. Who's here? High schools. Yell it out. All right. Thank you so much. It is indeed my pleasure. My name is Dr. Anton Reese, serving as president of West Kentucky Community Technical College, to introduce to you Crystal Wilkinson, to share some insights, thoughts, and engage you in her book, Water Street. I would encourage you, as good students do, not only to soak it all in, but as great lecturers love, we love that engagement, right? So that call and response from the audience and your engagement is incredibly appreciated. Let me just mention a couple of points here. Ms. Wilkinson is an award-winning feminist poet, novelist, memorist, and professor from Indian Creek, Kentucky, now living in Lexington. She's a founding member of the Afro-Asian Poets Collective and is currently an associate professor of English in the Masters in Fine Arts and Creative Writing program at the University of Kentucky. Please give a warm welcome to Crystal Wilkinson.
Good morning. Are you all warmed up? Everybody feel all right? I thought what I would do this morning is I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my career, and then I'm going to read a little bit, but mostly I want to talk a lot to you all, and I want you to talk back to me. So I want you to tell me what you thought about the book. I want you to ask me questions. You can ask me hard questions. I got a pretty thick skin. Even if you want to say something negative, I got it. I think I can take it. And I wanted to get a picture of y'all. Is that okay? Everybody agree? Anybody don't want to be on social media? Speak now, forever hold your peace. My husband's supposed to do stuff like this for me, but he's sitting way in the back. He's not acting right. All right. I did exactly what they told me not to bump the microphone. I'm in trouble. So I want to thank Britt and Shirley, Amy Sullivan, Laura Oswald, Tammy Thompson, the selection committee for the One Book Read. I want to thank all of you all for reading the book and for being here this early. It's not that early, but for young people it might be early. So storytelling has always been a part of my life. I started writing stories as a way to cope with the loneliness of rural life. We lived on Indian Creek, kind of far back up a holler when I was young. I grew up with my grandparents. My mother had been diagnosed as being a paranoid schizophrenic, so I was a child that grew up with sort of this legacy, if you will, of being the crazy woman's daughter. So I think that too sort of encouraged me to write. The fact that my mother was mentally ill and we lived in a small town and everybody knew whose daughter I was caused us a stigma. So I was raised by my grandparents, and so on 3 miles up the road and 3 miles down the road, we didn't have any neighbors. The neighbors were that far apart. So I was also an only child, and like I said, I was a lonely child. My grandmother always told the story that after I had read all the books in the house, that was the one thing that I can do. I can remember skipping, what did I skip? I skipped second grade because I was reading probably on a 5th or 6th grade level because my grandmother had started early. They didn't give me the math test or I wouldn't have skipped, but I did skip. But my grandmother always told the story that after I had she'd read all the books that she could to me. I started reading myself, and I'd read all the books in the house. Then I started writing books on my own. And I think people always ask when I became a writer, and I think I was about 12 years old when I became a writer. And what sealed it for me is I was a lover, as some of you all might be, of paper and pens. The scholastic festival or scholastic day at school was the big day for me. I was the super nerd. So I wanted the books, I wanted the papers, I wanted paper in different colors, and I wanted different pens and pencils. So that was like Christmas for me every time the scholastic reader people came to school. And so I remember writing stories and poems down, and then I went to my grandmother's Singer sewing machine, and I sewed a seam down the side of this little book that I had made. So that was the first time I was officially published, and that was when I started calling myself a writer. I teach writing, and on the first day of class, I always tell my students that they have in front of them a writer who teaches, not a teacher who writes. And so that's very important to me, and I think it becomes important to some of them who want to be writers. As a black woman who grew up in the foothills of Appalachia, I come from stories, as many of you all do. Stories made up our everyday lives. My grandmother and grandfather, who respectively only had an 8th grade and 3rd grade education, were excellent and wise storytellers. Their stories were full of all the things you need: plot, intrigue, intensity, characterization, complication, and down-home pluck. These stories spiraled from a tradition that demands stories be passed on for both entertainment and for the knowledge that a people existed and why they existed and where they existed. And so this kind of writing and paying homage to those stories and those storytellers and those people is sort of the core of my writing. I write, as some of you all know who've read the books, primarily about Black lives and their connection and disconnection to the land and to each other, and to those of other races and geographical origins. Stories connect me with both the people I understand and the people I don't understand. Writing a story provides for me a conduit to reach across race, to reach across geography, to reach across gender and any other barriers. I always say that on the bridge of a story stands me, stands my readers and the characters. For the length of the story, all these worlds that wouldn't normally cross collide and they interweave, and hopefully, if I've done my job correctly, we all come to some level of understanding on that bridge. There is a bridge here too between the written word and the reader as listener and participant. My work is fixated on both the oral, so the oral tradition, and the oral tradition. So telling and listening. My influences as a writer lie in the melding of oral traditions from both Appalachia and Kentucky, as well as African American and other ethnic fictions. And I wanted to talk about Kentucky writers a little bit, because I think when I was many of you all's age, I read a lot of books, but I didn't have not one book that was written by a black writer, and I didn't have one book that was written by a Kentucky writer. I would have never believed at 11, 12, 16 years old as a teenager that someone like me could write a book. I just didn't think that was possible. I think Kentucky writers are often defined, praised, and sometimes ridiculed for our emphasis on writing about the region. But in my opinion, Kentucky writers write not only just about the place as a setting, but also the sense of place and the story of place. And by that I mean it's not enough for us to simply define Kentucky by creating a snapshot of the physicality of the place. We live in a very beautiful place. The landscape is beautiful. But I think in order to have a narrative, we've got to reach some level of tension. And that tension can be found in expected and in unexpected ways, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that. So the landscape, of course, like I said, it's beautiful, but we also have strip mining and mountaintop removal and those kind of things. We have a lot of homes and buildings and businesses being built on top of that land. So all of that, the differences between the old ways and the new ways creates a certain tension. Heritage, I think, is a way that we create tensions. The difference between rural people and city people. You know, when I travel, it's often thought that there's only one Kentucky. I get still, at this age and in this century, I get so offended when I go other places and they still say stupid things like, oh, you have on shoes, you're from Kentucky? They say stupid things like, you live in Kentucky and you're black? Yeah, pretty much, all my life, pretty much. And then because of the accent I have, that takes it even another layer. They don't expect this accent to come out. I used to have really long dreadlocks, and people would stereotype me right away. And they'd be like, okay, I'm thinking this particular thing about her. And then when I would open my mouth and I'd have this accent, they'd go, oh, what's going on? So I like to write about those things too. Family rituals is another thing that I like to write about. I find that to be a source of tension. Things that only my family did, or I've come to find out, I thought those things were normal, but other families didn't necessarily do those things. Ancestral memories, things that are passed on from other generations, things we keep from generation to generation, and things we choose not to keep. Things we can't help that are sort of in the blood. Things we don't want to help that are, our cultural heritage, or our Appalachian heritage, or our Kentucky heritage being passed from line to line. Voices of our people, like I said, I wrote an entire essay called On Being Country. I remember even going to college at Eastern Kentucky University. People saying, and you all, many of you all, how many people have got this question, where are you from? And it usually comes as soon as you open your mouth and you say something, and for me, it was always my long eyes. I've been a city girl long enough that sometimes they're sort of curved, but I used to say white and not, and people were so surprised to hear that, and then that was immediately what it was. Where are you from? Well, where are you from? I started to get really offended, like, stop asking me that. Where are you from? The truth versus the lie. My grandmother, I was a lying child. I'd like to say now that I was imaginative. I turned into a writer. It's what I do for a living, is write fiction. I tell lies. But my grandmother always said, are you telling a story? And of course that meant, are you telling a lie? So that was part of that oral tradition. I'm sure many of you all have sayings that only people in your family or your region say. My husband's from Louisville, and we fight all the time about things, and he'll say, where did that? Nobody says that. And I say, everybody says that in Casey County. Can't remember. I said one day, oh, it's raining to beat the band. And he said, what? Nobody says that. And I said, people say that in my family. People say that all over the region. And he was like, mm-hmm. I like to talk about him when I get in. I like to talk about it when I get in places like this where I know I have people that have my back. Culture and celebrations. Does anybody know what a basket meeting? Anybody know what a basket meeting is? How about dinner on the grounds? Now, y'all, some of y'all are too young, maybe, that don't translate. But dinner on the grounds in my family was when the church would come together and have a church picnic, and we did it like once a summer. And then we called it dinner on the grounds, or a basket meeting, where everybody would sort of gather and all the women would go together and cook the food, and the men would get the ice and the ice cream and all of that. And we'd have sort of a revival, but mostly it was a celebration, and not just a family celebration, it was a community celebration. Are there community celebrations that you all have? Huh? Tater Day? Okay. I'll have to find out about Tater Day. Oh, no, not good, I think. I'm going to find out about it. What about any other things? Huh? Barbecue on the rivers. Okay, so those kind of celebrations, and I think it's up, one of the things I always tell my students is, it's up to you to write the truth of your time. And a lot of times, I spent many, many years sort of being embarrassed about where I was from because other people made fun of it. It took me a long time to sort of get my back straight about where I was from and be able to write about it. So religion is another thing that I like to write about. And it's not just, what people are fighting about now about religion. I think that I grew up as a Free Will Baptist. And my grandparents were really, really strict. And I think one of the things that was unique about the way that we worshiped was that we were so small, and we went to Mount Salem Baptist Church in Pine Lick, Kentucky. And one of the reasons why we went there was because we didn't really go to the white church, and that was the black church that was across the county. Now, we didn't go every Sunday to the white church, but my grandmother would have quilting bees and all kinds of gathering with the white women at the white church. But then we would all go as a family to the black church. And because it was such a small place, we didn't go to church every Sunday because the preacher wasn't there every Sunday. He was only there on the first and the third Sundays, and then he had another church that he would go to on the second and fourth Sundays. So we went to church every other Sunday. So I thought that was unique, and that's something that I like to write about. Outsiders versus insiders. I think if you're from a small town, particularly in Kentucky, and maybe anywhere in the world, there's this outsider-insider mentality, like, who are these people coming into our town? If you get somebody new at school, everybody's like, well, who is this person? I grew up in a place where you could live there for 50 years and still be considered an outsider. When I was about some of you all's ages, I was in high school, or maybe I was in what would be called middle school. There was a family that moved there from Michigan, and they were the Clefmans. And Mr. Clefman, who was the patriarch of that family, just died just a few years ago. And just last year, Mr. Clefman died. And even after all those years, 40-something years had passed, everybody in my hometown would call them the Clefmans from Michigan. They weren't the Clefmans from Casey County because they weren't from there. They were from outside of there. Gender roles is another place that I find tension and write about the roles of women, or the purported roles of women, sort of right against what traditional gender roles might be. And so I write about that a lot. And myths. Myths within the family. And whether something that somebody does in a family is honorable or dishonorable. Those were some of the things that I write about. So to close this part of it, I think that mostly what I think about when I write is that a story tells, like I said before, and a reader listens. So I try to capture that sort of oral tradition. So I had decided, and I talked about this last night, and he wasn't there, so I'm going to talk about him and embarrass him. But I went to creative writing class yesterday, and Cephas had said, how do you begin a story? So both last night, and I thought about it again this morning, and thought I'm not going to do it, but I wanted to mention how important it is for those of you all that want to be writers. Cephas said, how do you begin a story? And so I had originally said that I was going to come in here and read the beginning of every story in the book, but I decided not to do that, and decided not to do that again today. But I did want to tell Cephas that his question was on my mind. This is Cephas. Raise your hand so people know who you are. He's a fiction writer. How many of you all write? All right, I see you. We're all in community together. Everybody declare it. I hear people say, I want to write, but you have to declare yourself a writer. and do it. So I'm going to read maybe all of it, maybe some of it from The Fight. Did you all read this story? I think it's one of my... Somebody asked me last night what was my favorite, but I like this story, The Fight, story of Tony and Candy. Let me see what time it is. And so while I'm reading, y'all's part of this is to be ready to ask me questions when I stop reading the story, okay? Everybody got one question? It can be about the story or it can be about something else. Y'all ready? The Fight. Before the fight, the house is swarming with Aunt Daphne and her 3 children. Girl, boy, boy. The girl is 3 years old and dumpling fat like me and my sister Candy. The boys are 6 and 7, skinny little things, wild as puppies. Aunt Daphne's husband Leroy is out in the backyard with my father. Through the side porch window I can see Daddy firing up the grill and Leroy's hands flying up in the air and his lips working 10 miles a minute. Daddy's face looks like he's in some physical pain, like he's caught in a wrestler's headlock. Leroy is not the kind of uncle you call uncle. He's just Leroy. He talks loud and nonstop about everything there ever was, like a record player with no off button. The house and the yard are loud, 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 and Candy and me are like our father, quiet like birds. My mother and I are at the kitchen counter, which still has white flour spots from this morning's biscuits. She is mixing the hamburger with chopped onion, spices, a bit of breadcrumbs, and an egg. I am patting out the hamburger meat, forming them into large round patties and placing them on wax paper, which lines a big green serving platter. Our mother is a culinary magician. She has perfected the art of stretching food. She can feed 12 people with 1 pound of anything and a few odds and ends. But barbecuing is my father's specialty. Candy and Aunt Daphne are at the kitchen table. Candy is shucking corn and placing the long blonde silks into a large piece of newspaper, and Aunt Daphne is chopping cabbage for coleslaw and has just put the potatoes on the stove to boil. The kitchen is a mess, just like the rest of the house. Mama has never been one for appearances. There is no magic in her cleaning skills. The house is not filthy or nasty, just messy. Piles of paper in the corners, bills, articles torn from magazines, mimeographed copies of poems my mother liked in high school, old photographs of Grandpa before he died, and Mama dressed in pleated long skirts and sweaters when she was young. Our house is full of things like that, things my mother wants to keep. There is clean, unfolded laundry on all the beds. All of our dirty clothes are still on the floor in the bathroom from our baths this morning. We are amazed when we visit other people's houses and see things neat and tidy behind closed pantries and shut closets and cabinet doors. The boy cousins are running through the house playing cowboys and Indians. They are running from the living room to the kitchen over and over in a circle, yee-hawing and grinning from cheek to cheek like it's the most fun they've ever had. I hear the coffee table being shifted from its spot. It makes a dragging sound across the hardwood floor in the living room like fingernails on a blackboard. My mother and Aunt Daphne keep on talking as if they can't see the hooligans running through the house, taking whatever's in their path with them. All this noise wakes the fat baby girl, Acela, who has been asleep on the couch. The toddler who looks so cute in the pictures that Aunt Daphne sends is suddenly transformed into a monster. Her hair is all over her head from her nap, and her face has the nubby imprint from the couch fabric. Her face is so torn up that she looks like one of the Sleestacks off Saturday morning TV. Her mouth is gaped open to holler. She is red and silent, but when she gasps for breath, a blood-curdling scream comes out. Aunt Daphne grabs her up in her arms like she's a smaller baby than she really is and rocks her over her shoulder. Yes, that's Mama's love. Shh. Brother's waking the baby up. Our cousin is big for her age and looks like a 6-year-old with her creased, plump legs sprawled across Aunt Daphne's lap. She goes from screaming to cooing like a dove under Aunt Daphne's open-palmed fingers, rubbing her back in wide, soothing circles. Bless her heart, Mama says, and smiles that I remember when smile. Aunt Daphne and my mother are both slender as string beans. It's only when they smile wide smiles and wrinkles form at the edge of their mouths that you can tell that they are in their 40s. They are close like me and Candy. The only difference is that me and Candy are more heavy-set, not fat, really, but big-boned. At least that's how our mother explains it, big-boned from your father's side. Late at night, in the glow of the nightlight in our room, we talk about all the things we would do if we could will ourselves skinny. I'd be a model, Candy says. Walk down the runway with my bony hips, cameras would flash, and I would smile like this. Candy puts on a face that makes her teeth look false and ghostly under the glow of the orange bulb. We sputter and choke with laughter. I'd marry the finest thing walking, I say, recovering my breath. I would live in a big house, and I would cook and have babies and all that. I'd be a detective, too, like Christy Love, but only I'd have a bigger afro than hers, wear my Agner boots and short shorts, have gold earrings as big as coffee saucers. I scoop my hands up into the shape of a large circle, and I'd grin at them like this. I smiled, too, wide enough to make Candy laugh. We try to keep it low because if we laugh too loudly, Daddy knocks on the wall and threatens to come in and whip us. He never does, no matter what, but we keep it down anyway. Me and Candy have bunk beds, but when we are in the mood to gab, we climb into one bed and whisper out our skinny futures into the dark. I wake up in the middle of the night and kiss Candy on the forehead. She wakes up and kisses me back, too. She always thinks I'm asleep, but I'm usually playing possum. We both wish we were like Mama and Aunt Daphne, who don't dress in style anymore, but would look perfectly good in a mean pair of hip huggers or a bodysuit. No flab hanging over, even with all these kids. Sometimes me and Candy lie to each other and say, "You look like you lost some inches." We pinky swear that we'll go on another diet soon, but we were never serious about it before the fight. By the time the sweet pickles are cut into the potato salad and the baked beans are removed from the oven, Daddy is stabbing the blackened meat with a fork and throwing it into a waiting pan, jabbing the steak, the hot dogs, the hamburgers, and rubbing his head. Just from looking from this distance between the backyard and the house, I know that Leroy is not only standing on Daddy's last nerve, but jumping up and down on it. Daddy likes it quiet. I lean into Candy and whisper, "Time for a rescue mission," and we carry out the plastic utensils and plates to set the picnic table. Mama and Aunt Daphne are still talking in the living room, and the baby is now rounded out in my mother's small lap, spilling over the edges like yeast spread rising. "Daddy, we got plates," Candy says as we leave the stuff on the table and head toward the men. Daddy's face is pinched up like he's at his maddest, and Leroy, whose back is slightly turned to us, seems oblivious that he is adding steam to Daddy's pressure cooker. "And so I told that fool, 'Man, fool, if I ever catch you around my car again,' and he shot off straight down the street like a bullet, lickety-spit, like a GD bullet. Like I was telling my friend Petey, 'Petey,' I said, 'I don't know what I'd do all these years. Girls.'" Daddy turns to us like we're savers. "Take over for a minute while I go in and use the bathroom." "I got it, man. These ladies know what they're doing. Don't nobody live in my house and not learn how to cook, especially as much as they eat. Now, don't they look like they know how to cook?" Daddy winks at us. Leroy laughs like a crazy person, and Candy don't say nothing. We are both mad. Well, not really mad, but hurt. Everybody always has some little fat joke to tell. Seems like they all think it's okay. It's not. It still hurts us just the same, but we play like it doesn't stab us in the heart. "Daddy, please," I holler back over my shoulder, keeping my smile in place. His belly is round as Buddha's, and I say, "Look at that," and point. "I'ma remember that one, girl," Daddy says and points his finger toward me. "I'ma get you for that one. You girls looking prettier and prettier every time I see you. You hitting them books like you supposed to," Leroy says. "Yeah." We shrug our shoulders. "You got boyfriends yet?" "No." Candy looks at me with that he is so yuck look. Through the back door, we can see Daddy in the kitchen talking to Mama, and this time he's the one with arms flailing in the air. We hear their voices rising, but we can't hear exact words. Aunt Daphne is there too, the baby on her hip playing mediator. Leroy's tongue is a worm set loose, wiggling its way through all our business, asking so many questions that Candy and I are lost in his jabber. We try to keep our responses to head nods and three-word answers. Daddy finally makes his way back, but as Candy and I head for the picnic table, Leroy gets in one last blow. Them girls so pretty. Just wait till they lose that baby fat and y'all gonna need a stick to beat off them wild boys. I got a shotgun if I need it, Daddy says. But even through his joking, we can see that he is angered by something. Something is blowing in the wind. We have crossed the yard and are about to shut the back door before we turn to see our father belly to belly with Leroy, his fists clenched down by his sides. Leroy, if you don't shut the hell up, I'm going to give you something to talk about. Come on then. I know you don't want none of me. Mama, Leroy, and Daddy are about to fight. Candy yells, right in the yard, I add, knowing the words make no sense even as they are coming out. Lord God, come on, Daphne, they are so crazy. Stupid men all these years, and they still can't get along for 10 minutes. Mama and Aunt Daphne are into the yard before we know it. Aunt Daphne has passed the cellar to me. I'm holding her with my hip jutted out, trying to balance the weight. Candy is talking to her and grabbing her chubby fingers into her hand. It's okay, baby Acela, she coos. Your mom'll be back in a minute. Acela's lips are puckering slightly, one of her arms reaching for her mother. I shift my weight again and bounce. She's really a cute baby. Hi, girly girl, I say. She seems to like the sound. Hi, girly girly. If that's what it keeps her from crying, I'll do it until Aunt Daphne comes to get her. What in the hell is going on? Aunt Daphne steps between Daddy and Leroy. Facing Leroy, Mama is in charge of Daddy. Y'all are too old to be acting this way. Don't he ever shut up his damn mouth? Man, I ain't done nothing to you. You better keep your hands to yourself. Daphne, you better tell this fool something. I'm going to tell you both something. The children are watching. All the grown-ups turn toward us. I am balancing Acela like a large box, wedging her on my hip. Candy is standing with her arms folded, waiting to see what happens next. The boys are in the house doing God only knows what. But it is over before it gets started. Daddy is back tending the food, and Leroy is walking around in the yard a few feet in front of him, cooling off. At dinner, Leroy is back at full speed, talking about nothing to nobody in particular and everybody at the same time. This potato salad is good. Y'all ever had that potato salad in the store? Now, that is some awful mess. Tastes like paste. No flavor, no salt, no mustard. We had this picnic at work, and I was telling this guy that I work with, man, this tastes like glue. It did too, just like some paste or something awful. Leroy screws up his face just like baby Acela had earlier. Me and Candy are sitting by each other, and just for that purpose, as a Leroy shield. We roll our eyes at each other, we communicate with our eyes, and decide not to talk unless we have to. Mama and Aunt Daphne, they are carrying on their own conversation about how long they were in labor, even while Leroy is talking. Lord, girl, I thought Candy was never going to make it out. I was in labor for 48 hours. I know you remember that. Probably got the scars still on your wrist to prove it. Mama laughs, a cackly young laugh. Daddy is putting all his energy into an ear of corn, concentrating on blocking out both conversations. At least that is what I think he's doing. And ain't nothing worse than bad potato salad or bad mashed potatoes. Now, you would think folks wouldn't mess up mashed potatoes, but they can. And look at her now, Aunt Daphne says. Look at both of them now. Wouldn't ever believe either of them started out this big. Aunt Daphne snaps her fingers. No bigger than a minute. She looks at me and Candy like we're Mama's prizes, and Mama smiles at us like we are, like she always does when she remembers us in plaits and baby walking shoes. The boys have each other. Fat Acela is bounced on Aunt Daphne's knee and has a long string of slobber slivering toward the table. Daddy is sold up like a bullfrog. Good God, Daphne, do y'all have to talk about childbirth at the eating table? Leroy shakes his head. Aunt Daphne glares at him, but acts like he hasn't spoken a word. She, Aunt Daphne nods toward Acela, was my hardest. All back labor, all up in here. She rubs the small of her back and makes a face like she's feeling the pain again. All that time, Mama says, and you had only dilated 4 centimeters. Exactly. Mama and Aunt Daphne go back and forth like this in ooh and ah, like they are in a room full of women telling these birthing stories for the first time. The boys are playing with their food. Mama, I don't like this. It tastes like it's got dirt clods in it. See? One of them says and spits the potato salad into his hand. Shoot, Miles. Aunt Daphne tries to catch him before he rubs it into the picnic table and mixes it in with the baby slobber. Daphne, baby, get that boy. Damn it, boy. Now, why is he doing that, Daphne? Daphne, get that boy. My God. Ain't got a bit of table manners. Leroy, please. Daddy sucks air through his teeth and takes his frustration out on his hamburger. He bites it hard and shakes his head. Mama eyes Daddy, but don't say nothing to him. Daddy, it tastes like dirt. Boy, you don't know good food when you see it. When I was a little boy like you, I ate whatever was put before me. Didn't say a word. Aunt Daphne shakes her head, scowls, and keeps up her conversation with Mama. Leroy's diatribe is much more embarrassing than anything that little Miles has done. Miles tucks his chin close to his chest. Aunt Daphne is one of those mothers with octopus arms. She is cleaning up Miles' mess and doing all this while holding the giant baby and shushing the other boy, Marquez, before he does the same thing, all the while keeping a conversation going with Mama and occasionally glaring at Leroy. Good Lord, my Mama says in a teenager's voice that we rarely witness. She and Aunt Daphne cup their hands around their mouths and giggle. They are wearing the same shade of brick-colored lipstick like 13-year-old girlfriends. My mother and Aunt Daphne whisper in each other's ears. They block the rest of us out and talk about people and things that only they can understand. Mama becomes playful when Aunt Daphne is around. Aunt Daphne and Leroy come to visit from Cincinnati once or twice a year. It has always seemed to be a chore for my father. I look at these women and wonder what they were like when they were little. I can't see ever being away from Candy. That night, Candy and me settle into our beds, and the day becomes a collection of memories to be stored away. The bad boys, Acela, the screaming baby girl, Leroy, the smell of my mother's baked beans and my father's secret sauce. Mama looking as though she was about to cry when she waved bye-bye to Aunt Daphne from the driveway. Daddy's discontent. With the memories stored away, all the world is right again. I feel the warmth of Candy's familiar body next to mine. We are bedtime clean and donned in our favorite pink pajamas, whispering quietly, not knowing that our lives are about to change. I cling to the memory of this moment even now because it is the last time I remember feeling totally certain about my place in the world. In the moments that followed, our parents' voices grew from the familiar inaudible mumbles to full-fledged war words that left us all scarred. How am I supposed to feel? My father's voice quivers with rage. How in the F am I supposed to feel? I don't know how you're supposed to feel, my mother screams. What's done is done. It's a long time ago. What can I do about it now? Every time he comes down here, he throws it in my face. Did you have to tell your sister everything? You told her and she told him. I don't want to hear his mouth every single time. Benny, what do you want me to do about it? Janice, I don't know. All I know is that they're both my girls. They're my babies no matter what. We'd never heard our father cry before. Benny, they're always going to be your girls, both of them. You're her father too. My sister and I grow cold underneath the covers and hug each other. We all cry together. One of us is not our father's real child. We feel our parents' hearts break through the wall that separates us. The next morning, a Sunday, Mama cooks breakfast. A mound of bacon, scrambled eggs, toast buttered on both sides, bacon gravy, and fried apples. our mother cooks over the half-filled baked beans dish, the rank bowl of potato salad, all the barbecue utensils from yesterday like they are not there at all. She is our regular mom, pleasant, but yesterday's giddiness has drained all the tears too. She's living life in neutral again. My father seems normal too. Nothing is spoken about last night's revelation, and me and my sister watch our father place his arms around our mother's small waist and plant kisses on her neck. Candy and I are afraid to ask, hoping it's a dream that will float away. In the whiteness of daylight, last night seems surreal. I look at Candy and shrug my shoulders when nobody's looking. She is glassy-eyed and bewildered, but we all hold up this face through breakfast and seemingly so far for the rest of our lives. By late summer, Candy and I grow tired of searching through our mother's old pictures and putting our ears up to the walls trying to seek more information. We even eavesdrop on the other line when Mama talks to Aunt Daphne. Still, we know no more than we learned that night. The second Saturday in August is back to school time. Me, Candy, and my mother have sat on the porch all day long watching the other families and their kids carrying in bags loaded down with blue jeans, skirts, blouses, and shirts, number 2 pencils, and reams of notebook paper in bright pink, blue, and green. It is one of the hottest days of the year, and we are on the porch swing, and our mother is rocking gently back and forth trying to make a breeze in this sweltering heat. We are each sipping a glass of fresh lemonade and waving at the neighbors as they arrive and depart from their houses. We watch the boys climb into cars with their parents with mad on their faces. Boys hate this time of year. We watch the girls and their mothers drive off together. We even see someone we don't know pick up Jeanette Stokes. But this is a time of rest for us. Our dresses are already pressed and hanging ready for church. The house is clean as it gets around here, and Daddy is napping in a lawn chair in the backyard. The yard is mowed, and we are all waiting for 5 o'clock when Daddy will fire up the grill and we'll bring the boiled meat from the kitchen, the hot dogs, the perfectly round beef patties that are waiting in the refrigerator. School is about to start, and we are prepared. Our mother finished our shopping in June. Candy and I are 2 sizes smaller. When we tried on our new bras last night, we both marveled at each other's smooth lines, not hardly any flab at all, only a tad bit on both of us around the middle. While our parents dig into the heavy meal and make small talk about the weather, a neighborhood softball game, and church, Candy and I nibble at our meat and fill our plates with salad. Neither of our parents notice who we've become. Tonight we'll sleep with the lamp on. It is our new normal. Our whispered conversations are inventions of what our mother's lover looks like: tall, short, young, old, brown skin, light skin. We invent worlds where our mother engages with her man, the man that is one of our fathers. Maybe he is a poet from up in New York who was a speaker at the library and she couldn't resist his love poems, Candy whispers. No, why would he be here in Kentucky at Stanford's library? No, he was her high school sweetheart. You know, the one that Daddy used to tease her about? A traveling preacher who gave a guest sermon at the church. Somebody Mama works with down at the creamery. The plumber from over in Crab Orchard who's tall and light and looks like a movie star. The truck driver who broke down at the bottom of the hill one time. We do this every night. Sometimes we stare at each other without blinking to try and figure it out, trying to find the father in one of our faces. While she is sleeping, I look at Candy and wonder which of us is the real daughter. A flash of jealousy rises in me when I think I spot Daddy in her face, but then I kiss her just the same. When I try to fall asleep, I can't. I lay awake and watch Candy sleeping like she's at peace, like she holds the real answer inside her like a secret. I want to shake her awake and ask, but I don't dare. Candy and me have always been the same, almost like twins, yet I can't help but think that somewhere inside our bodies, inside our hearts, something is growing and stretching out a shape between us like a rubber band, stressed and pulled so tight that there is nothing left to do but snap. Thank you. So, this is your part now. Questions? Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the food, he asked, was the food a coping mechanism? Was that your question? And I think so. I mean, I think a lot of families use food to cope with stress. Sometimes the lack of food is the stress. But I think when there's nothing else left to do, and things that people don't talk about, they overcompensate with food sometimes. Yes?
I have a question. So has Leroy actually said something to offend him about, the little girl's identity? Or is he just self-conscious and defensive? And so Leroy...
No, they don't talk about it. So the father and the mother don't talk about it. He's just taken this child as his own, and they never talk about it. And so Leroy knows because the women have talked about it, and he always brings it up every time he comes down. Yeah. When they're out there cooking, he talks about it. Just like he's one of those people who just talk all the time, just to be talking. Yeah. Yeah, and so he says something to him every time instead of keeping his mouth shut. Even though I imagine that they had this talk on the way from Cincinnati. Don't you say nothing. Don't you dare say anything to him. And of course, he couldn't help himself. Being Leroy. We all got one in our families, right? Everybody's got a Leroy.
Yeah.
I think I might have more than one, but we got them. Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think he's one of those people that it's like the Chicken Little thing, right? He talks so much that even when he says something important, nobody hears it because he just talks too much. And so people are sort of used to dismissing him. But of course, the dad hears those offensive things. Like he definitely hears that. Some other questions. Y'all didn't come this long way not to ask questions. Yes?
Is every character in your book based off of somebody, or did you just come up with everybody?
I mean, it's fiction, so yeah, I just came up with everybody, and they're all figments of my imagination. But I will say that there's a thread of truth in every story. Like I could go through each story and tell you what the thread of truth is. I most often talk about Jeanette's story, Jeanette Stokes. When I was writing her, being from such a religious background, I found myself just pointing my finger at her in a really bad way, saying, bad girl, stop doing that, because she was the girl in town who had the reputation, even though I had already figured out why. But because my mother was a paranoid schizophrenic, I knew what the situation would be for a teenager to have a mother who was considered strange in such a small town. So once I just gave her that little part of myself, I was able to tell her truth without doing the finger wagging, without sort of shaming her. So each of the stories has some thread of truth. Sometimes it's real thin as a hair on your head, and sometimes it's thicker as a rope that comes from some part of real life.
What was your reason for not implementing Reverend Townsend more into the story? I felt as if he had more potential to be a good character besides just his story in the book.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, he appears some. He appears in... who else's story? He appears in plain sight in Jeanette's story, and he appears here and there in other places. I don't know. I think that it probably was some kind of religious guilt. I did find myself, he's a character that I'm drawn to. I'm still drawn to him, and maybe I'll write about him more later on. The novel that just came out in 2016 explores Mona and Yolanda. It's sort of a continuation of this. They're the whole focus. So there's still room for an exploration of Reverend Townsend. I like him as a lot, and his sort of complication as a preacher figure, as a minister. And his thread of truth, I think, is based off of a minister I had growing up, who was a single man, who was very beautiful and very strange. Like, I come from a community of farmers, right? So Reverend Townsend, our preacher, would have like a three-piece suit on, and he had a pearl-handled cane, and he had a waxed mustache and a waxed beard, and he was a barber when he wasn't being a preacher. Sort of like, I don't know, we'd probably call him a Mac now. He always looked like he was, really dressed to the nine. And I think all the women were really attracted to him, although he didn't really date any of them. They all sort of swarmed around him all the time, frying him chicken and making him pies and cakes. And he never really acted on it. So I always sort of thought about what his private life might be like. So I think that's the thread of truth in his story. I just didn't explore it more. Mm-hmm.
What I got from it was, like, just, I guess, comfort burial. At first I didn't know if, like, he loved it or not, but then I think I got from it, like, just his religion kind of, like, held him back with pursuing it.
Mm-hmm.
And he would, like, whenever, like, they were at the dinner table, like, he would be, like, abstaining from being, like, the brethren, like, he really, like,
Yeah.
that barrier, and it was kind of sad. And then, like, he wondered why everyone got, like, mad. I'm just like, because you're reverend right now, you're not, like,
Yeah.
That's what I got from it.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, he just couldn't bring himself to give in too much. He gives in a little bit, but not too much. Yes.
Okay, so I noticed as the stories were going on, it was mostly in first person.
Mhm.
And then when it got to Reverend, it was in third person. Was it because he was ashamed of his story? Or
I think it's just distant. There are two stories. Which are they? There are two stories that are in third person. I do believe that because of what I've talked about, coming from a storytelling culture, that I try to allow characters to tell their own stories. And that's usually how my first drafts come out. And then sometimes I do change them to third person, and sometimes I don't. But there's one other story. I can't remember which one. Do you all know which one? There's one other story that's in third person. I can't remember. Which one?
It said close to the end. I can't.
Oh, Miss Pearline's story is third person. Respite. Yeah. And so I don't know. And maybe, what happens to me as a writer is that I write these stories, and I think that I know everything about them. And then you go zoom forward 10 years, and then I'm like, oh, I can't believe that was in there. Like I was telling the group last night that I was in California last week, and there was a professional actress who performed in plain sight. And I thought, well, I wrote these stories in like the 90s, and, there's nothing that's going to affect me about them. I've worked through all my emotions about everything. And when she acted this story, she acted the story out. She did a dramatic reading of it. And I was on the front row bawling, just like just chest heaving the whole bit. It just affected me so emotionally. And I think, one of the reasons was that, my mother passed away in 2016, and the mother in that story toward the end is dying. And I maybe that was the connection, but I think it's probably even deeper than that. I think as writers, we don't always know what that thread of truth is. Even when we come back and examine something, we see more of ourselves than we even intentionally left on the page.
As a writer, do you believe there could be too much background to a character, whether it be hidden or implemented into said story?
Yes, I do as a writer, and also as a teacher of writing. I think that you can have too much. I think that you can't know too much, but I think you can share too much with the reader. And I'm always on the line with that about how much to share. And it's all about the sort of spokes on the wheel theory, right? If you're writing a story about this, whatever the center of the story is, you can't share everything, like when the character was born and what they did in first grade and unless it relates to what's at this spoke, what's at the center of it. So that's how I try to operate. I do love description, and I love sort of mining a character's life and their background. And, I confess I'm sometimes an oversharer of information about a character because before I write them, or by the time I have a draft, I feel like I know everything about them. But does everything I know about them need to be included in their story? No.
I'm just curious about the ending. Do you see it as an ending for the cycle, or do you see it as just a standalone ending?
I talked about this last night, and now, all these years later, I would have to say that if I could go back and change it, I would probably change the ending. But this is the ending that I fought for at the time when it was published. I fought an editor to the death for this ending because I really wanted it to show, to go off the street. And that was my idea of taking you off of Water Street into another character and ending that way. And I don't know if I feel like any of the stories are a true ending. I think that if I had to do it over today, that I would do something else that would be sort of like something that would reflect that sort of welcome that I did at the beginning, where it's welcome to Water Street, that I would do something like physically moving off the street, what you would see, like even after Angie's story. Thank you all so much for listening and for your attention this morning.
I want to thank everyone today on behalf of the One Book Read Committee. I am Amy Sullivan. I'm the co-chair, and Tammy Thompson has been running around taking photos. She's our other co-chair on all the committee that's here. Thank you. We are so glad and appreciate your all's support every year, and some of you are new and some of you have been here for many years, and we're working on our 11th year of this. We do have a wonderful website, onebookread.com, that includes all sorts of information about Crystal Wilkinson, her other books, some other resources, things that connect with that book, a discussion guide, chapter by chapter. So if you haven't viewed that, we invite you to do so. It will be up for a long, long time because we're celebrating her all year this year. We're proud that she's our first Kentucky author that we've had as part of our One Book Read, and so we're glad that you got to be a part of that as well. We also get the question every year, when's your next read? What's your next read? What's the next author? Well, that has not been decided yet, but we hope by the end of the school year, by the end of May, that's always our goal. We hope that will be the case, and sometimes it's a little longer, sometimes it's a little shorter. So just stay tuned, and onebookread.com is the place to go to check that, and your teachers usually find that out pretty early on. So again, thank you so much for participating in our One Book Read and for your support.